Hi guys, this is Seth Christensen with the Got Any Cows podcast. 20 years ago, I was an 11-year-old kid with 2 bucket calves. Today, we have sent genetics from our company to 40 of the 50 states and 12 countries around the world. I still learn more every day, and I invite you to learn along with me. I'm here for another episode of the Got Any Cows podcast with my buddy Jason Anderson. And Jason, we were just chatting today while we were scanning cattle. You've known me about half my life.
Yep, half your life.
Yeah, you and I have been working together. I mean, we've done AI projects. We've done Carcass Ultrasound. We've done, well, I've been there while you were ringside running ring at a production sale.
Yeah, you've been driving with me.
Yeah, we've gone driving. Yeah, we've gone driving straight through all day, all night, from basically the northern border to the southern border and back again.
Yep.
Straight shot. Yeah, no, it does several different things. But backing up, I guess, fill us in a little bit on your background, Jason, kind of where you come from, and then I guess mentioning today's subject material, touching on Carcass Ultrasound, where you come from and how you got into cattle, and then how you got all the way to ultrasound.
All right, well, I grew up in Colorado and spent some time in Utah as well. I went to Rick's College, studied animal science and beef production.
Go Vikings.
Yeah. And while I was there, ranching kind of skipped a generation in my family, and I wanted to get back to it. My grandpa still ran cattle, and it's something that I wanted to do, so that's why I studied what I studied. And after Rick's, I worked for a little while before going back to school at the University of Idaho, where I finished a bachelor's in animal science production.
Really? I didn't realize you graduated out of Moscow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I knew you did.
Go Vandals.
Go Vandals. You and my ag teacher would be best buddies. I said, my shout out to Laren Crosley, who's tried unsuccessfully to get most of his students to go to the U of I. He has got a few up there though.
Yep.
So you graduated there then.
Yep, I did. Yep. I went to Logan.
Okay.
And married an Aggie.
Yeah. Go Aggies.
Yep. Yeah. And then after college, I went and worked on the ranch, and then went to work for Gen X CRI, and sold bull semen and did some breeding projects with you and around the country.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you'd have studied, when you were at Utah State, did you study animal science while you were there then?
No,
or
I just
studied your wife?
Studied girls, yeah, my wife.
All of the important things, you
Yep.
know what I mean? Got done what needed to happen. And then did you guys get married before you went up to Moscow?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah,
right,
we got married in May, and then went up there for the summer and started school again.
Okay, gotcha. So we were just working with your boy Colton today, shoot side, while we were running cattle through for Carcass Ultrasound here today. Going back to your family, did you guys have kids while you're up in Moscow, or when did kids enter the picture?
Yeah, so my oldest Gabe was born in Moscow.
Okay. Yeah.
And then he went to a ranch in Oregon with us. Mm-hmm. And then when I went to work for Gen X CRI, we moved to northern Utah.
Okay.
And Colton, who helped us today, was born in Tremont.
Okay, gotcha.
And then my last 2 kids, Sage, my daughter, and my son Ephraim, were both born in Jerome, where I've been living for the last 20 years.
Gotcha. Has it been 20 years already you've been in Jerome?
Yeah.
Wow. That's going by quick. Because I've known you, I think the bulk of the last 20 years I've known you, but I think you've probably been in Jerome about since I first got to know you.
Yep.
So, no, that's been a minute there. So today, at this point in time, walk us through kind of what you do on the day-to-day. Because you've run a series of different businesses. You know, I mean, you're a jack of all trades. You know how to do a lot of different things, and I've learned from you in a lot of different things. We've worked together since I was really young. You know, I mean, I think the Advantage Cattle Services, shout out to anybody listening that remembers Advantage Cattle, because that's been a minute, you know. But Brian Weaver, put that on out of Iowa and was a forum, dedicated to cattle, and it's been fun actually following up. I caught up with Jake Hauschel out in Kansas, the last time I was out that way, and I didn't even realize, until we had been chatting for a while, he was Rockin' H Jake at the time. But anyway, one of those deals like, I knew exactly who he was once you mentioned Rockin' H Jake. But anyway, clear back at that point in time, trying to remember from there forward, what would have been the next thing we'd have done? Maybe cattle sales or AI projects after that?
AI projects.
Yeah. Yep. So walk us through, I guess, from there till now. What are you doing now?
Well, kind of. So I ultrasounded cattle for 22 years.
Okay. Yeah.
And for 2 of those years, I also worked with Gen X CRI. But for 5 years before that, I had worked for Gen X CRI.
Yeah.
And well, sorry, I got that backwards.
Oh, you're good. I've been kind of just running in circles thus far. Like timeline order, I've just thrown out the window. So I've gone from like here we are here and there we were there. You're good.
So I was in Logan, helping Doug Coombs and Hoffman AI with one of his breeding projects.
Okay, sure.
And one of the guys I was working with was Brett Bowman, who's still at Utah State.
Yeah, Brett was one of my instructors while I was there. Yeah.
Anyways, we hit it off real good and worked together real good, and he's the one that got me interested in looking into Carcass Ultrasound.
Okay, gotcha.
And so after that weekend with him, I was like, that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
And so I went and figured out what I needed to do. I went through training courses back in Iowa. And then that fall, I took my certification and started ultrasounding cattle. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the clients that I'd been providing semen cells to, it's because I had a relationship with them, I was able to start scanning for them.
Yeah.
That first year, I scanned 1,300 head.
Really? Just right out of the gate?
Right out of the gate.
Yeah.
It was pretty awesome. And we grew up to 7,000 head one year, and
wow.
And this last year, just probably closer to 2,000 this last year.
Sure.
And
Yeah. So walk me through looking at Carcass Ultrasound. Why does it matter? Why would someone consider? So you had been selling, like you'd mentioned, you'd gone and you'd studied, you'd graduated out of Moscow, got married, you've got your family, you've been doing AI, and now we step into doing Carcass Ultrasound. Why Carcass Ultrasound? When you've been AIing for somebody for a while, they're familiar with you, they trust you, they've been working genetics, and you come saying, hey, you should ultrasound. Why?
Well, when we first started doing it was, a lot of these registered breeders were buying semen based on EPDs and genetics, pedigrees, phenotype, all that kind of stuff. And all that involved ribeye and marbling and back fat. Yep. And it was something that was important to a lot of people. Right. And when picking bulls. And also, it was an education for a lot of breeders to some of them just started doing it with me. Mm-hmm. Some of them had been doing it a little while. Yeah. But it's important because that was one of the tools they used to sell bulls or females, and also a tool to keep females within their own program.
Sure, you bet. So, when you're looking at Carcass Ultrasound, what are you looking at? When you put that ultrasound on the animal like we just did today through the chute there, what are you looking at?
So we look at basically 3 different images. We're looking at rump. We're measuring where we measure rump fat. Yep. And we're looking between the 12th and 13th ribs, where we're measuring the rib eye and also the rib fat. Mm-hmm. And then the third image is a cross-section of the ribs over the 13th, 12th, and 11th ribs, to where we're catching that loin muscle and measuring the marbling or intermuscular fat, IMF.
Right, absolutely. So when you're looking at that, why does it matter? Like, why would we bother to do like we did today, run about 100 animals through the chute, clip each of them, put that ultrasound on each of them? Why does it matter that we see those metrics you've just mentioned?
Well, that's our end market is the meat, the beef. But more importantly, I think is birth weight is something a lot of people look at, primarily because it's the most heritable trait. Sure. Carcass is your second most heritable trait.
Really? I hadn't even realized that.
Yeah, I think if I recall right, birth weight is like 42% heritability. Mm-hmm. Ribeye is 38%. Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Might be wrong, but I think I'm right.
Sure, I'd be willing to bet you're right. Yeah. That's interesting.
So yeah, it's important because it's a highly heritable trait. You can change things in one generation with birth weight or carcass really quick.
Right, right. Oh, and we've seen, it's interesting and informative in any given breed or amongst any given bloodlines or whatever else. You'd mentioned earlier, people can try to increase things like ribeye or marbling via pedigree or via EPDs or via, frankly, hearsay, of these ones should be good or these should do well. And it's really informative. And I was just mentioning to you today while we're scanning, I really enjoy getting that hard data on all of our animals because I could take a look and see which one of these actually marble, which ones of these actually have a good ribeye, which ones of these are going to put a quality product on the plate versus just which ones should have or we'd like to think they would, or the EPD said they would, or the pedigree said they would. I love seeing the actual hard phenotypes, and gathering that data.
Right.
So what do you see as being, the difference between gathering hard data like that versus just making your best estimate with things like EPDs or pedigree or whatever else?
Well, I really like to see the hard data when we're scanning cattle. I can see trends with sires.
Yep.
I can see trends in not just ribeye size, but ribeye shape, and with marbling.
Yeah.
And as far as I had a brain fart.
Oh, you're good, buddy. Happens to me all the time.
Yeah.
And I generally I'll roll around in circles. I'll kind of start over back here yonder-ish, and then I'll come back around, and I get lost and wander all the time.
So when it comes to EPDs or fads, that's another thing. And I think when I think of EPDs, I think it's important not to do single trait selection.
Sure. Yeah.
But I think it's definitely important to know that those EPDs are based off of raw data, and even genomics. But raw data is more important to me.
Sure. Yeah, and I do think it's one of those things, and you and I were just talking about this. It does get lost in the shuffle sometimes, or lost in the noise, as far as there are so many selection tools available, and that's all any of them are, is just tools.
Right.
But because we have pedigrees and we have EPDs and we have genomics and we have so and so says this or so and so says that, but then having the actual hard data versus any of the rest of it, all of those other things are what should be. For me, the hard data is what is. You know what I mean? Like, if I take an animal and send it to harvest or whatever, and I'm going to deliver that meat to friends and family, we can go off of like, well, if I wander in and tell them, hey, but this has got these great EPDs or this has got this great pedigree, they don't really care. They care, does it or does it not marble? Does it or does it not have a decent rib to it? I mean, is there or is there not a quality eating experience to be had here? And that's where it's just so exciting to me to get that hard data.
Well, and breeders, they can find those outliers.
Right.
Even on those sires that have the best EBDs, they're going to have outliers of calves that don't perform like they should.
Sure. Yeah.
Or perform better.
Right. Yeah.
So that's an important reason for hard data.
Yep. What does it cost to get it collected, Jason? If I'm looking at my per head cost, what's it going to be?
So the cost is kind of a big factor. A lot of it depends on the distance traveled, because I've traveled 7 states ultrasounding.
Right.
The number of head scanned.
Absolutely.
Whether I have to stay the night and fuel.
Right.
So cost can vary anywhere from, when I started it was $15, and over the years with experience and value and inflation, it's anywhere from 25 to 35 a head.
Sure.
And a lot, and so it's also important to know that part of that covers travel, and all that kind of stuff, but it also covers the lab fees that where I send the images to be interpreted by another person, an unbiased person.
Right.
And their lab fee, it changes, and I think it's like $6 something.
Sure, sure. Yep, yep. And that gives us a good idea. I mean, if somebody was going to go budget and say like, well, what's it going to cost to get this data put together? There's at least a window there.
Yep.
For 25 to 35, maybe higher than that if it was an itty bitty deal, maybe lower than that if it was just a massive deal. That'd be a reasonable window to project on.
Yep.
So that's helpful. How long does it take you, Jason, if you're coming in and getting that data collected on a per head basis? What kind of time frame are you looking at?
So when I started, the first year I averaged probably 3 to 5 minutes per head.
Sure.
In my prime, I'm not in my prime anymore. I was about 88 seconds. I timed it one time because I wanted to know from the front of one animal to the front of the next animal.
Right.
Today we're probably closer to 2 minutes.
Sure. You bet. And and it was nice. I mean, we're making good time. Like I felt really good about how we were clipping through them and everything, but we weren't trying to turn and burn, roll as fast as possible.
We weren't in a race. We weren't trying to get 280 head done in a day.
Right.
Normally, if I do 90 or 100 head, I used to always finish before lunch. And then we'd have lunch and then finish the rest.
Sure. Yep. Absolutely. So if somebody does decide, hey, I'm going to go ahead and do Carcass Ultrasound, I guess one question I didn't even include on the list, like I mentioned, there'll be a question come to me always as we record, or I think of something I didn't before. Where do you find a technician? You know what I mean? As far as, so throwing your hat in the ring there, where would you or wouldn't you be willing to scan at this point? And if somebody's outside of that area you want to service, where do they look for a Carcass Ultrasound technician to even get started being able to gather that data?
So to become certified, you have to be certified through the Ultrasound Guidelines Council.
Okay.
So they have a website.
Okay.
Or you can also find a technician through the lab. There's I'm not sure how many labs. I think there's 3 labs today that collect the data and interpret it.
Sure.
I worked with the Cup Lab out of Ames, Iowa for a whole 22 years. And their website is cuplab.com.
Okay.
And they have trainings and information on certification. And then also have a list of all the technicians and the areas that they cover.
Right. Because like you mentioned, I guess there'd be the 2 different pieces.
Yeah.
There's the technician that gathers the data shoot side, and then there's the lab that interprets
And
it.
breed associations also provide that data on their website and in the journal.
Okay.
I'm not sure what all the different breed associations do or don't provide, but Angus was real good at providing that as well.
Right. So that at least gives people an idea if they say, hey, I want to know what my cattle are like carcass-wise, and gives them an idea what to look for. And I'm going to throw in another question here that, again, I forgot to put on the outline, but I'm thinking of now that we're talking about it. So you and I, we had initially planned to scan in the fall. That was the plan. That was the target. For me, as we were grazing throughout the summer, we made the wrong call on where we rotated a set of bulls to. So my bulls were under-conditioned in the fall, and we opted to wait for the spring. And that's just due to me. I mean, that was a management error on my part. And so as you're looking at when to scan, walk us through, appropriate ages and or just condition, how much condition needs to be present to even be able to see some differentiation in marbling ability.
Yeah, definitely. So there's a general guideline for every breed. Most breeds are the same, where the minimum age requirement is 320 days of age, roughly 10 months.
Yep.
And for bulls, 440 days of age, and heifers 460 days of age.
As maximum age as the association would accept.
Yeah, correct. Right. So roughly 15 months.
Yeah.
And so that difference for everybody.
Yeah. Yep.
Hereford is actually 301 days to 530 days.
Gotcha.
So they have a larger window for collecting that data.
Yeah.
So, in my travels, I would be back and forth from Washington to Utah to Oregon to Idaho to Utah. It was something that I could never be like, let's start in Utah and work our way to Washington. Because everybody has different calving dates. Everybody had a different sale production date.
Yep.
That they were trying to get data for.
Right.
It's a complex service
Right.
that is provided as
Yeah.
far as traveling and going back and forth.
Right, right. Well, and like you mentioned, those people are trying to catch really specific date ranges for the association because the association has specific requirements, and with good reason. They're trying to make it so we're comparing apples to apples, across
Yep.
operations by controlling for age. But for us, like I mentioned, rolling from fall to spring, which wouldn't have worked if my goal was to submit data to an association.
Right.
But for us, my goal isn't necessarily to compare my cattle to all the animals in the country or all the animals in the breed registry. My goal is to compare my animals to my animals. So I'm personally going to parse through that data and compare like age to like age. I'm not going to make direct comparisons between mature animals and yearlings. You know what I mean? I'm going to break out those subsets. I'm going to break out what data is and isn't applicable to compare head to head. And it's going to let me interpret it rather than the association providing a standard, and then the association interprets the data or turns it into EPDs or feeds it into their respective system and things like that.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about what condition they need to be in.
Yeah, yes,
But body condition score is big. You don't want your cattle to be thin.
Right.
And you don't want them to be overweight.
Right.
Especially for breeding cattle.
Yeah.
But I mean, I've scanned fat cattle, grass fat cattle, and grain finished cattle as well that would get harvested within a month or the next day.
Yep.
To compare, live versus ultrasound.
Right.
But definitely, the biggest thing I saw for heifers, as far as the best weights to scan, would be at least 750 pounds. And then anywhere after that, most yearling heifers are upwards of 1,000 pounds. And as far as bulls go, I think it's important to scan them between 1,000 and 1,200 pounds, and several have been scanned at 1,400 or 1,500 pounds as yearlings.
Sure.
It just depends on the person's feeding program. Talking about feeding programs, the data, the EPDs that are generated are based on what the animal is fed as well as scanned and the days of age of the animal. So there's a mathematical thing that goes in there as well.
Right. You touched on something important, so I'm going to throw something else in here because this is good. We're all the way up to 3 things that I didn't tell you I was going to ask, but that I'm anticipating or that are worth asking because you've mentioned them here. You mentioned talking about scanning cattle and then harvesting cattle, at close time frames, and it has been proposed by people in the Wagyu industry especially that Carcass Ultrasound isn't any good on Wagyu or it doesn't correlate to actual kill data. What would your response be to that proposal or that theory that they're not related?
They are related. I've even at Utah State they have a 3910 beef course for ranchers, and we'd go down there and let the ranchers evaluate live cattle. We'd ultrasound them so they could see the data, and then the next day or even the same day, oftentimes the cattle were killed, and they correlated amazingly well. And they have to, even with our certification. When we're certifying, we have to scan 20 animals twice, the same 20 animals twice. That has to correlate with hanging cattle, and it has to be. I'm not the numbers guy, but it's got to correlate really. The standard deviation of error has to be really tight.
It's got to be tight.
Not with just the animal, but with every other breeder that's scanned that animal.
Yeah.
But there's a huge correlation. I've been on research projects where people have raised Angus Wagyu crosses, and we've gone in and scanned those cattle, and the next day they get shipped and harvested, and it correlates very well.
Yes.
I've scanned grass cattle where we've determined a projected based on their scanning if they're going to grade to continue in that grass program or have to be pulled out of it and put in a feedlot to finish out in a different way.
Yep.
As far as Wagyus and any other breeds go, I think, based on my scanning experience, they grow differently,
Yes.
and their marbling comes at a different stage of age.
Yes, sir. I agree with that.
And so the same age Wagyu cattle aren't going to do the same that Angus cattle will
Right.
at the same age.
Right. Yeah.
It's
yeah.
kind of a later maturing animal.
It is. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. No, and you're spot on. So even in the Wagyu sired cattle that you scanned and then killed right away, even though they're Wagyu sired, because I've had it said that, oh, you can't scan Wagyu because they have a low fat melting point, so you can't see it on an ultrasound. But you killed cattle that were Wagyu sired, you scanned them and then killed them, and the data was tight.
Yeah, they were Angus Wagyu crosses, and the data was tight.
Yeah. Yep.
They were yearlings.
Right.
So
Right. Yep. Yep. And so I have found, as we look at, and we will continue to gather more and more kill data, and correlate those two data sets. But I am absolutely confident. I can sit there and stand there with you shoot side and say, well, if that's not marbling, I don't know what it is. As we were there, scanning a whole pile of Wagyu cattle today.
Yep.
Akushi, red Wagyu.
Yep.
But, I don't know what it would be other than marbling. All of the things we were just looking at there.
Well, it's pretty straightforward. It's you know what you're seeing.
Yeah. Absolutely.
The one thing that is fun about seeing that, I talked about rib shape and rib size and marbling, and a lot of times breeders would have 4 or 5 sires.
Yeah.
And they were pretty proud, as they should be, to tell me who animals were as they were coming through.
Yeah.
Well, oftentimes, as that animals would be rolling through, I would be able to tell them who the sire was based on the marbling or the ribeye size or the rib shape even.
Yeah.
Which was even fun.
Right. Absolutely. And there is. It's like you said, there's trends there.
Yep.
You know what I mean? There's things that are the same in the shape. There's things that are the same about the amount of marbling. And it's neat. I mean, you can visually see it,
Yep.
that you're able to track that back.
Yep.
That's a cool thing. So looking at you mentioned, there's another thing here, and I'm glad this is why we have these conversations, because if we didn't, I'd just have kind of what I can think of off the top of my head, but as we talk, it brings more things to my memory. And you mentioned something important in the age of the scan, or how these cattle mature differently and things like that. Because looking at an Angus, if we scan an Angus somewhere around a year, 10 to 15 months, there are Angus animals that are more than ready to harvest by 14, 15 months if you push them hard and have them there ready. Whereas in the Akaushi breed, by and large, there are differences among programs, but by and large, they're not going to be ready to harvest till they're closer to 2 years of age. There's some that are ready by 20, 22 months. There's others that might push clear out to 3 years. But the point I guess I'd be getting to is that there might be more differentiation that we would gather from doing the same thing, from taking the same 100 animals, running the same 100 through the chute and having you look at all of them. When we're getting that data back, what I'm looking for is separation among animals. I'm looking for who scans better versus worse. If they all scan identical, I've not gained wonderful. That's great. Hopefully they all scanned identical high, but I'm not gaining actionable intelligence as far as like, okay, sire A outdid sire B, or dam A outdid dam B, or just informing these are the lines that are marbling better within our program, or these are the individuals anyway that are marbling better within our program versus worse. And so I do think there's some added benefit for us, specifically where the bulk of our cattle are Akaushi or red Wagyu, to have scanned them later or at a more advanced stage. And we could still do it at a year, and we'll probably continue to go forward, and we'll do some at a year, we'll do some at 2 years. There were several animals today we scanned for the second time, so I can kind of evaluate where they were at age A versus advanced by a year, and look at them again at age B and things like that. But I do think there's going to be some more separation, or we have seen historically more separation on animals with more age, as far as saying, oh, these ones continued to marble, whereas those ones are about where they were at when they were a younger animal.
Right.
So I think that's an informative and a helpful thing to touch on there. So if you were going to go scan, whether it's you or another technician or whoever, if you're going to go do carcass ultrasound, how many animals do you think a person needs to have for it to be worth trying to engage in carcass ultrasound?
Well, the breed associations say 2 to generate EPDs.
Okay.
So that's the minimum
Yeah.
that in order to generate an EPD on an animal for carcass ultrasound.
Yeah. Yeah.
To be worthwhile for you or I or another breeder,
Yeah.
you know, I think a minimum of even 10 would
Yeah.
be fair, if especially if they have a mindset of growing and
Yeah.
improving
Yeah.
and knowing what they got.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. Absolutely. What do they need to have for a shoot setup? If somebody says, "I want you to come scan my cattle," what kind of setup do they need to have to scan them in?
So any shoot, I've scanned out of every brand of shoot there are, and I have my favorites.
Hey, so what are your favorites? There's another great one. Yeah. What are your favorite and least favorite kinds of shoots? Because you've scanned in a whole fleet of them.
Yeah, I really like scanning in silencers. High hogs are nice to scan in, and those red Thorson pole rope shoots are nice to scan in. I don't know if I want me to say the ones I don't like, but
just as well.
But there are. I don't like the blue one. I think they're called Pearsons.
There's a Pearson and there's a Priafert that are both coming blue.
Yeah, Preferts, I guess. And I don't like the high quals. And the other one is the green one they call the Cattle Killer.
Which one? I say that Powder River.
Powder River.
One? Yeah.
The old style Powder Rivers. Like,
sure.
But those. But my favorites are definitely Silencer, High Hogs, and Thorsons.
Yeah, we've loved the Silencer.
Yeah.
I mean, that's been a game changer since going to that. Yeah.
It makes everything easier. It's a lot of work on a person's body.
Yeah.
Just standing there, twisting, turning around, shoulders, hands.
Yeah.
All that kind of stuff. It's repetition work.
Right.
So, but as far as the most important, I guess not the most important, but power is important.
Yeah. What do you need for power supply? Do you need a
just
overkill power supply?
No, just 110.
110.
Yeah, and I've taken my generator in several places where there's not been any power. Shade is nice. Whether it's a permanent structure or just a little tent. That it's not just the elements of rain or snow, but it's also the sun.
Yeah.
It's difficult to see a computer screen when the sun's shining on it.
Right.
And so that's important. But a good safe place to scan is really nice.
Yeah.
And a good working facility is nice, where cattle can flow, where your team or whoever's team can keep cattle in the alleyway, can keep them in the tub, can keep them coming to where we don't have to stop and wait. And there's sometimes we have to stop and wait because cattlemen, and I think it's great. I had no problem with it. Cattlemen would have to give shots, put seeders in for breeding time, do different things to the animals. And I didn't have any problems with it because it'd be better doing it then than having to run them through another time.
Sure. Absolutely. Yep. Well, and one thing I just thought of here again, man, it's a good thing we're having this conversation and not just going off what I wrote, because here's another one. Scales. What kind of scale setup do you need to have? And I guess if somebody doesn't already have scales under their chute, what are some options, or how do you work around that? How do you get a good weight? And I guess walk us through why you need to have a weight on scan day.
Right. So the animal, it doesn't have to be on scan day.
Okay, that's good to be aware of.
It needs to be within 7 days plus or minus of scan day.
Okay, gotcha.
And the reason for the weight is because that's part of the calculation in determining the EPDs.
Yeah.
And with the age and the feed.
Sure.
That the animals are on. I've seen people I've seen people weigh before they come into the chute, often a big scale, one at a time.
Yeah.
I've seen them do it afterwards.
Yeah.
I've seen scales in the alleyway. I've seen a lot of scales underneath the chute.
Yeah.
So there's all kinds of options for them to be weighed.
Yeah. Do you have any preferences or any that have caused problems that you've run into as far as approaches to weigh them?
Well, and I won't say a name because I'm not perfect either. But one cattleman one time it was his first time scanning, and we ran him through, and he didn't have the scale was 50 yards away on the other side of the corrals, and I was willing to help him weigh him, and he said, just guess what they weigh, and so that's a problem. When someone doesn't want to, and he never collected the weights on them that I know of. So that's a major problem. But it's always nice when they can be weighed at the same time I'm scanning them, because when the animals come through, and I had to look at your outline. So when the animals come through, the first thing I do is shave the areas that I'm gonna scan to where the hair is less than a quarter inch long.
And I am going to pause for just a second to interject a quick thing there.
Yeah.
But one thing I didn't think through really well one time when we scanned, I didn't think through. Make sure if you're going to picture the cattle anytime, in the immediate future, you absolutely can picture cattle right after having ultrasounded them, and plenty of people do, but there can and will be a chunk of missing hair, because that has to happen to get a quality carcass image. So I guess be aware, because one of those things, I don't know, you don't know what you don't know. Like, and it didn't cause a big problem for us. Like, it all worked out fine. We had our pictures done, but as they all rolled out, I thought, I'm glad we just got them done, rather than that we were about to do them, and then that there is going to be a chunk of hair gone. So not to throw you off track, of the system of what's occurring, but I think it bears mentioning. If you're about to picture cattle, you probably want to picture them, then ultrasound them versus vice versa.
Well, and it's nice that the technicians scan a nice patch.
Yeah.
I remember my first year that I scanned, the auctioneer, when those cattle went through the sale ring, he's like, "Who the hell scanned these?" And I didn't think I did a bad job, but obviously somebody did. And so, we try to do our best when clipping those cattle so that they're still presented. But one thing that I always thought of when you saw a clipped animal with that patch on their side, that's the sign and the mark of a success.
Yeah.
I think anybody that's progressive in collecting the data, if it creates a mark like that on the animal, people know what that mark is.
Yeah, that's true. It does. It says, hey, this producer took the time and went through the effort and spent the money to collect this data, because there'll be some oil there'll be some clipping there, but you're right, it is a mark of we cared enough to gather the data on what this animal does.
And that's what I've always felt like, regardless of whether my clippings have been I'm not a showman.
Yeah, right.
I didn't grow up clipping cattle.
Sure, neither did I.
And so that's the least fun of the whole job is for me is clipping them and getting that hair on me.
Sure. Yeah.
But I still loved it. I still love it.
Yeah. So if you come in, we've got the chute set up. We've got a scale set up of some kind for us. We've got the scale under the chute, under the silencer, which is not the way it's always been. I am thrilled that that's the way it is today. But boy, we've made a lot of other things work with all sorts of different facets of how we've done things historically. But today we were able to do it that way. They come in the chute. You needed to have power. You had 110 power.
Yep.
We had a scale there. We were able to restrain the animals. We clipped them. You scanned them. What do you need as far as, I guess, space around the chute and everything else? Walk us through what your setup looks like.
So I have a little table that sits on the side on the chute.
Yeah.
And I have the ultrasound equipment and a laptop set up.
Yeah.
And then I also have my clippers on the table and my oil on the table.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So when the animals come in, I have oil prepared and in like a bike bottle.
Mm-hmm.
I clip them right when they come in the chute.
Yeah.
I oil them. I ask the breeder for the ID, which is generally needs to be the same as a tattoo, and for the weight.
Yep.
And then after I oil that animal, I enter that information in the computer, and then I start taking and saving images.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I take one rump picture.
Yep.
I take 1 or 2 ribeye pictures to make sure I get a good ribeye image and rib fat image, and then I take 4 to 5 images, same image of the cross section of the marbling. And basically I'm saving 6 to 8 images per animal. And then when I'm done, I say, let's go.
Yeah. So what if I'm lining up and getting ready and prep to do a carcass ultrasound day? How much help do I need? You know, if a technician's coming in, what do I need to have as far as number of people to really be ready to flow these cattle to you and get done what we need to do on the day?
You know, if there's a lot of cattle to do in a day, you need someone bringing them up to through the main alley, into like a bud box. Yep. Then to where from there they might need another person to keep them flowing through the through the chute alley. And you know, when that back door opens and one animal's going out, one animal should be going in.
Right.
So obviously a chute operator is optimal.
Yeah.
Lots of times, you know, if they have the help and have someone that can do a chute order recording on paper,
Yeah.
to correlate with what we're doing on the computer, because there are errors sometimes.
Sure.
With, you know, if someone says the animal weighed 868 and I put in 888 or something like that, you know, we can fix it.
Sure.
But I've seen and been part of where it's just me and the rancher, but we're not doing, well, yeah, we're not doing 280 head in a day.
Right.
I have worked on a place where it was just 3 of us working 280 head in a day. But you know, they know what they're doing. They're good at what they do. I've been on a place where I was left by myself to do it all.
Really?
Where I would bring in.
They just said scan them. They just said just scan them. Here you go.
Yeah, I'd bring in the cattle and catch them and go around the other side and scan them and turn them loose.
Huh.
So
well, that's one way of doing, I guess.
Yeah. You know, they wanted it done but didn't have time to do it, and asked if I'd be willing to do it, and I was.
Yeah. Huh. That's interesting. So data submission to the association, and this is one where I am not good at this. So, you know, especially the first time that we ultrasounded, getting my head wrapped around what exactly I needed to have stuff formatted correctly, or to have the association be happy with it, or have it fit their standard procedures and protocols. What does it look like to try to get the data set up right so that the association will accept it? Versus now, it doesn't matter because I'm doing it all internal at this point in time. It's all just data that I'm gathering for my information and to inform my breeding decisions. But if I am submitting data to an association, what does that look like?
So the first thing a breeder needs to do is when he weans his cattle, collect weaning weights.
Yeah.
And submit them.
Yep.
When he submits them, then they will get an ultrasound barn sheet from the association.
Yeah.
So that happens about half the time.
Yep. I was in the other half.
That's all right. That's all right. So once they have that ultrasound barn sheet,
Yeah.
then they can. That's the information where they put the ultrasound weights on there and the date they were scanned. So after I'm done scanning, I submit all the images and those barn sheets to the lab, the cup lab.
Yeah.
And the cup lab, if they have the barn sheets, the images, and the payment, they will turn that around in 5 business days.
Gotcha. Okay.
And basically, that means that it's turned into the association, and the association has data, EPDs, and data, and back to the breeder.
Right, you bet. So if we talk about getting the data back, like for me, it'd technically be commercial data because it's just feeding back to me as a producer, not to a third party like a breed association. What are we looking at for processing timeline in that kind of a situation?
So basically, you know, tomorrow I would submit the images, and the lab would get them, and you'd have your data back within the week.
Awesome. Awesome. Perfect. So what do they look like? If we're looking at raw data in the case, again, coming around to my situation here where I'm going to be the one receiving the data, what will I get? So we've done all the work. I guess we've gathered the cattle. We've brought in the technician. We've run them through the chute. We've recorded weights and tag numbers. We've got the images. They'll go to the lab. And then what comes out of the lab to me? What's my receivable, I guess?
So you're gonna get as is data. You're not going to get any adjustments on age.
Right.
When you submit to the association, they're going to adjust that data to the yearling age of every animal, so that it correlates together to where they can run ratios and stuff like that. So you basically you're just getting strictly raw data because of your older animals or young animals. There's going to be no comparisons.
Right.
You'll do all that in-house yourself.
Correct. Yeah, so for us, I mean, when I get the data in, I'll see all of the marbling scores, I'll see all of the ribeye sizes, I'll have all that hard data. And then, I mean, a person could do with that whatever they wanted to do. What I end up doing is I do end up breaking it down into groups. So for example, today we scanned a whole bunch of 18-month-old animals, which would be our bulls, and it'd be our bred heifers, and we scanned that'd be the bulk of the day. And then in addition to that, about 20% of what we did today was donor cows and cows that we've harvested embryos from before.
And cows we've scanned before.
Exactly. Yep. And so I can compare those cows amongst each other as a group of mature animals, and then I can compare the young stock to each other, and I break them out that way. And then I do break them out by sex. I compare my bulls to my bulls and my heifers to my heifers.
Right.
And then within those groups, once they're broken out, now I can rank them and say, okay, because sometimes, some of the very most informative numbers are who's at the very top end of the bell curve, i.e. I ought to multiply this. This animal has the most marbling. Or here's one clear at the bottom end of the bell curve where it's like, well, I appreciate some other things about this animal, and maybe there's reasons still to use them and try to correct that in the next generation. But if my goal were to improve marbling, this wouldn't be the best selection, at the bottom end of the bell curve of the distribution of marbling within those animals. And so as I rank them that way, and like you mentioned, it's not a single trait selection thing. It's one more set of data that I can use to evaluate these animals. Because like I was talking to, as you and I were running through cattle, and I was telling you, my selection criteria, it really is overwhelmingly basic. But it's overwhelmingly difficult to get it all into one animal. I'm trying to get them to be good-mannered, to have docility. They got to be fertile, so they got to breed easy. They breed quickly, breed snappy, stick in a defined calving season. They got to calve easy. I don't have time to be pulling calves all day, all night. They got to grow quick. We can't be weaning dinks. They got to scan well. We got to have good carcass data like we're pulling today. And then they got to last a long time. There's got to be longevity to those cattle. And that's only 6 total criteria, and I've listed them there in priority order for us. But that's a challenge to work all those into one animal. But the beauty of this data we'll get from you, that spreadsheet that'll come to me from the lab there, is I can say, okay, maybe this animal is good-mannered, fertile, easy calving, and grew quick enough. But if it's devoid of marbling or absent of marbling, I say, okay, this isn't getting all the way along. At a minimum, if that animal's not removed from the program, it's going to have to be mated to something to correct that deficiency.
Well, and you'll see that a lot in even registered programs that are getting that data back. They might have a favorite heifer, and if she comes back with not good Carcass Ultrasound, they could breed her to be better.
Sure.
Or if it wasn't their favorite animal, maybe she's on the chopping block, and she does come back terrible. She's gone. If she comes back great, it's better than anything they've ever had. They'd be like, oh, maybe we should keep this one and try it out.
Right. Well, and it gives us one more tool in the toolbox, because like you've mentioned, and I'm glad you did early on, but the single trait selection is always dangerous. And it's interesting to see, depending on who you talk to or what their program is, what breed they run, there's a whole host of different traits that can be the single trait that people chase. We can say growth at all costs, or we can say marbling at all costs, or whatever it may be. There's a series of things we can chase. But when I look at, as we're trying to put all of them together, if they only marble, but they're terrible, awful ornery, and they're not easy to calve, and they don't milk worth beans, and they're, and it takes forever to breed them, I don't want them. But if they're a great cow and they don't marble, well, we're not servicing the whole spectrum of needs either, right? And so it's if we have the data, we make informed decisions, whatever that decision may be. If we don't have the data, we're literally just going off hearsay. Well, this pedigree says, or that EPD says, or I heard, or this and that should be, versus what is,
Right.
and that's what I most appreciate about gathering this data. It's exciting to me. I don't get as excited as I maybe should be at like Christmas, but I get way excited to see, how does our data come back on Carcass Day or things like that, because it's actionable data.
Well, it's exciting to me too, because not every registered breeder collects this data. And not every registered breeder even AIs their cattle. But when you find a commercial cattleman that AIs and then collects data, like, that's exciting.
Yeah.
That's really exciting to me. And you enjoy working with people that are progressive and willing to gather information for themselves first, and then share it with their buyers.
Yeah.
Whether it's a breeder, another breeder buyer, or even feedlots sometimes are looking at the cattle that come in.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Some major feedlots will scan animals when they come in, and scan them within usually a month later to see how they're progressed, and they can project on when those cattle are going to finish based on the scan data.
Yep. And it's actionable intelligence. So we're going to kick the hornet's nest here a little and say, why not just genomic? Why not just do the genomic test?
Yeah, it's a hornet's nest for sure.
Tell me your thoughts there, Jason.
I have a lot of thoughts, and they're probably going to get me in trouble.
Go right ahead. What are they going to do?
When people say my name, you think of the good, the bad, and the ugly. So I've had it all said about me, but this ain't going to change any of that. What I have to say, genomics by itself is crap. To put it blunt, it really irks me when people just go off of genomics, because genomics have to come from something, and that's from data.
Yeah.
And not just the DNA, but the data.
Yeah.
The genomics are trained by data, and there's some breeders get frustrated that they're the only ones collecting the data. And they're mostly the big boys.
Yep.
And all the little guys are basically riding the tails of the big guys. So genomics, I believe in genomics, but I don't believe in it without the data.
Right.
Because especially when the breed associations are putting more weight on genomics than they are hard data.
Yeah.
And that hard data doesn't change EPDs, only genomics do. Well, how? It doesn't make any sense to me.
Right.
And it doesn't make sense to a lot of people in this industry.
Right.
So why are they still doing it?
Yeah. Yep. And it's one of those things, we talked about all these different selection tools that are present. And I think, and it is important to look at them. I'm in the exact same boat as you. Like, I'll use genomics, and I do genomic cattle. I'm not anti-genomic.
Yeah.
But if the genomics aren't trained by something, then it's just extrapolates of extrapolates. And this is, I am a numbers guy, right? I love data, period, right? I love evaluating it. I love using it to inform selection decisions. Like, I think without data of some kind, and especially quality data, like what we're collecting today, you're shooting blind in whatever you do, right? We need data to make solid financial decisions. We make data to make solid breeding decisions. Data, period, is just so clutch.
Well, when you think of a breed association that collects a lot of data, what breed association do you think of?
Angus within the beef industry, Holstein within the dairy industry.
Okay, so I'm just going to go off of the dairy industry.
Yeah.
Holstein collects data to so much.
Oh yeah, more data in a day.
That's why their
genomics
genomics are trusted more than any beef breed is.
Right. Yep.
Because of all the data they collect on phenotype traits, on production traits.
Yep.
There's just so much data that's collected that those genomics are trusted. Well, it's not that way in the Angus breed. I don't believe it is.
No, that definitely. The Holstein breed gathers more data in a day than the beef industry across all breeds does in a year.
Yeah.
I'd honestly believe that.
Yeah.
You know, if you look at what they're tracking, and that's where I get around. You know, we talk about having good data to drive good decisions, right? We're all trying to improve traits just like the ones I listed, but quite often we're driving so blind. You know, and if you look at it from the Akaushi lens, the red Wagyu lens, like, well, you know, it's sired by this particular super sire, it has to be good. No, it doesn't. You know what I mean? Like there's just as many culls sired by super sires as there are by the average junker, right? And it's the same deal when we jump over, like, hey, so that's pedigree analysis alone by itself, which is kind of where the red Wagyu or Akaushi breed sits today. Sometimes we get fascinated with just some of these original import sires or things like that. But then if we jump over to things like Angus, which I'm also actively engaged in, and we say, well, you know, it's EPDs or EPDs alone. And I use EPDs, right? I run genomics. I analyze EPDs. I as far as beef cattle go, the Angus EPDs are as informed as any. There's as much Angus data as there is for any breed. But it's still just saying, like, well, at one point, a sire or a dam or a cousin or a sister or whatever was scanned or was killed or whatever else. So that means due to the genetic relationship, their EPD should be about this, which due to the genetic, you know, the heritability, their EPD should be about that. Plus the genomics, it should be about here. And so and then if you take those animals, and the way to make hot EPDs really fast is just to make yearlings to yearlings to yearlings for a series of generations. So if we get 6 generations deep, and it's all just extrapolates of data. It's not hard data. It's saying, well, this is correlated to hard data. But then, like you mentioned, a lot of that hard data is going away. We're getting to where it's genomics only. And so if you go 4, 5, 6 generations of genomics on genomics on genomics on genomics, at the end of it, do we actually have any carcass quality, or do we just have genomics that say there should be?
You just have genomics that should be. And so I've seen breeders where they've followed the genomics trend and they've quit Carcass Ultrasound, and they end up coming back to it because they need the data.
Right. Well, and you want the two to tie together, right? It's not to say, like, well, we don't ever want a genomic. That's not the case. We want quality data so that you could base genomics on.
Exactly.
They can't disassociate.
As one doing Carcass Ultrasound, I never tried to downplay the genomics. You know, what I saw a lot was genomics downplaying collecting the data.
Right.
So that they could sell their kit. Because breeders were making a choice between collecting data or running a test.
Right.
You know, and I think it was done all wrong. I think the genomics should have sold it made it sell together. And in fact, I think, you know, this runs a lot of hot water too with people. I think that data should be paid for by the genomics companies.
You bet, because it's what's training their data set.
By the breed associations and by the stud companies.
Right. Well, that's what I look at, you know, like we talk about with the associations and things and submitting data. It's not that I'm anti-association. I'm not. I still register all my cattle with multiple different breed associations, still participate in all sorts of different ways with the associations, still a proponent of the associations. But I'm not going to take all of my time and all of my money and all of my effort to inform somebody else's genomic test, and that's not to say I'm saying, like, well, I just refuse to share any data. Not so. I'll share data, but looking at it like I've put all the time and effort and money in, so it'll inform my breeding decisions. What does submitting the data do other than inform everyone else's breeding decisions that hasn't put any time or money or effort?
Well, that's what's happening.
You know,
Yep.
And that's the challenge. And so that's where I look at. It's got to be kind of a whole picture deal. It's like, okay, we've got the genomics. Maybe they give us an earlier peg on who some outliers could be. We noticed today on some of the biggest heifers that came through, I mentioned to you, they were top 1% growth females. The genomics pegged those ones, right? But it has to have all those pieces together, because if they only were top genomic 1% EPDers for growth, that doesn't matter. The pounds we saw on the scale do. And luckily in this case they correlated. But to get stuff to continue to correlate, we need to have all of those different pieces. You got to have the genomics plus the hard data plus the EPDs, you know, and like you mentioned, there's got to be some kind of an incentive to gather data, because if there's not, we're literally being penalized. I'm paying to gather the data, and he who doesn't gather any data gets to use it for free. And that, anyway, I don't know, maybe I'm just too firm a capitalist for that to jive for me. But I am grateful for the data and appreciate the data and put time and effort and dollars into gathering it. And it is so informative to me. But there's got to be something set up to where it says, hey, we're providing value to the association. Let's get a discount on the genomic rate, or let's get some dollars back to I guess there's got to be some value provided in return, instead of saying, well, you got to just dump data out there so everybody else can market their whatever based off your I don't know, your data that you've gathered.
It's a tough world.
Yep. And it is. It's a catch-22 question there, biologists, and it's one of those, you know what I mean, like there'll be different opinions on it. I'll have somebody say, well, I didn't agree with this or that or whatever, but and that's totally fine. Different people are going to take different approaches to it. But I mean, anything else, I guess, that you would share along those lines? I guess importance of phenotypes, importance of Carcass ultrasound, who should be Carcass ultrasounding. Give us any additional thoughts, things I've missed, I guess.
Well, I think every breeder should Carcass ultrasound. Yeah. Mostly for themselves. Yeah. That way they're not just going off the genomics or EPDs.
Yeah. Yep.
They can make better informative decisions.
Yeah. Yep.
But definitely every breeder that sells an animal should be providing that information for their customers.
Yeah. Yep.
And I made, when I had cattle, I made a decision I wasn't going to buy any animals without that data. And it just comes down to passion, whether you're the buyer or the seller, to collect that information.
Yeah.
So, budget's a big thing too, obviously, but just being a progressive breeder. If you want to be known as a progressive breeder, then you should collect the data.
Yeah. Well, and I look at it for us, if somebody reaches out to me and says, hey, even considering, clear back at the very front edge of building an animal. So say they're looking at buying semen. Okay, so just go and clear back, even like your Gen X days, that same type of approach. And looking at Akiushi specifically, like I mentioned, we're looking at it. It could easily be 2 years old by the time that animal's harvested. So if they're calling me up looking for semen and they say, hey, I am about to not only invest dollars in this semen, but I'm going to invest 2 years of time and feed and interest and pen space and tie up this cow and whatever else based on your recommendation of which one of these bulls you tell me is or isn't going to marble. Am I better off to say, oh, well, the EPDs said, or the pedigree said, or the genomics said, or am I better say, no, like, we had a Carcass ultrasound on this bull. We had a Carcass ultrasound on this bull's flush mates. We had a Carcass ultrasound on his dam, on his sire. And better yet, as we get 2, 3, 4 generations deep, where we've got all of that. We've got the EPDs, plus the pedigree, plus the genomics, plus the hard carcass data, plus the kill data, and we start stacking that in 1, 2, 3, 4 generations deep. Who's going to give a more informed recommendation? Me with that data, or somebody who's just jumped in and says, oh, well, this is a cool pedigree?
Yeah, and I think it's important for consumers to know that there are breeders, commercial and registered, that do all of that.
Yeah.
And I've had the pleasure to work with some of them.
Yeah.
In not just one breed or another, in multiple breeds. Mm-hmm. And it's a pleasure working with those kind of people. No,
absolutely. And I hope, I mean, what'll probably come out of the episode is I'll have 5-10 people mad at each of us or whatever else. But if there's one person that can say, hey, you know what? I am going to Carcass ultrasound. Like I've gotten a feel for what this system looks like, what it's going to take, why I should do it. If one person picks up Carcass ultrasound as a result of us having sat down here and recorded this episode, that's a positive thing. And I hope more and more people do it, because I mean, even for me, for my program, I'm constantly looking for, especially within Akiushi, can somebody tell me, hey, this one definitively scans at a better level, sire A versus sire B. Is there a donor or a stud out there that I know could add value to my program? And I know it can add value, not just like, well, it should or it could be, or these other indicators say that's possible. Like, no, like hard data, yes, indeed it does. And if one person scans as a result of this conversation, and that data is able to move their program forward, I mean, they're financially rewarded by proving this animal was elite. And I would love to incorporate some of those genetics here. We're never going to have everything there ever was that's perfect at only this one location. Of course not.
Right.
I hope other people get stuff that is data proven, that we can continue to incorporate here.
Right, and I hope the same thing. You know, I would be awesome to see more breeders turn to ultrasound.
Yeah.
And start collecting that information.
Yeah.
For themselves. Regardless of whether it's me or someone else doing it.
Right. Well, and I would touch even one last final point as I'm thinking through all of that. We scanned a whole bunch of flush siblings today, a whole bunch of animals that they have the same sire and the same dam. And one thing I can say conclusively after, you and I have done this for years now, is that those siblings, although they are flush siblings, are not going to come back all identical. They were bred the same. They have the same sire. They have the same dam. They were, calved in the same window, raised on the same feed. They're the same age. They will not be the same.
Yeah, they'll not be the same in EPDs, in phenotype, or even genomics.
Right. And, and so sometimes people want to say, oh, well, this one's a sibling to that one or whatever, so they're the same. And I say, tell me how much you're like your sibling. How much are you like your brother? How much are you like your sister? And are there similarities? Absolutely. But are you identical? No. Yeah. And if we cannot say, not only does this animal have a great sire and a great dam, but we've identified the best animal in the flush instead of just guessing like, well, this one looks good, or I hope this one scans well, or I hope this one's great. And we even killing siblings, which we can and have and will do. We're going to harvest siblings to some of these studs and these donors and get hard kill data in that sense. But I still want to know the one that's alive, that is procreating, is it or is it not good? Because I say, well, the siblings were great, but this one was a total failure, and I didn't know because I didn't Carcass Ultrasound. I don't care how many siblings you killed or whatever else. If we're multiplying the dud but don't even know it because we never looked under the hide,
right,
that's a dangerous proposition.
Yep.
So anyway, I'm excited as could be about the data we've gathered today. I appreciate you taking the time to gather the data with me and just your friendship over the years, all the things we've had a chance to learn together and work on together, and appreciate that. And any closing thoughts that you'd throw in here, Jason, things that you'd like to add?
Just how much I've even admired you, Seth. You're a tremendous cattleman.
Appreciate that.
You got passion. You got knowledge. I've enjoyed watching you over the years, and I'm excited for you and your program.
I appreciate that, my friend. I really do.
Yeah.
Well, absolutely appreciate you being on with me, my friend. Grateful for all the work we've done together, and look forward to continuing to work together.
Excellent.
I'll scan with you as long as you'll come scan for me.
For sure.
I appreciate it, my friend. Thanks
all right.
again.
Thank you, Seth.
You bet. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Got Any Cows podcast. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts, and visit us anytime at gotanycows.com.